Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Me, Myself, and Irene. So, I've been watching Moon Knight a lot recently because that's the new Disney Plus show. And I was starting to thumb through trying to find out what would be the new thing to watch for today. And all of a sudden I stumbled upon this movie. I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't remember what this was at first. I was like, okay, this is a Jim Carrey movie. Why do they have two different faces? I'm like, oh, right, because it's a movie, of course, where Jim Carrey is to have a split personality, and the story is to be this very fun and interesting piece where we sadly have Charlie, who is to be this very nice guy, optimistic, uh, even though he can say if he doesn't have good luck, he doesn't have luck at all. But Charlie, of course, is uh, trying to approach everything in a very nice manner, and it seems like the town is to take advantage of that, or the town is to just have Charlie be this punching bag. So Charlie goes on and is to talk to this preacher, and is to tell this preacher, it's like, you know what, Father? I have so much anger just built up inside of me, and I think at some point it's just going to explode. And the preacher is saying, Charlie? And Charlie's like, oh my god, he figured out who I am. And so he runs off. So instead of having Charlie go on and talk to somebody, or just kind of figure out how to just kind of release this pent up anger by going and possibly doing some things that could give stress relief or anything like that. Instead, Charlie is to go on and let things build because he has had so much bottled up anger for so many years that eventually it just explodes into him being another person temporarily. So Hank is to go on, and every single time somebody's to do something that Charlie doesn't like, we have Charlie who switches over to Hank and is to now take care of business, because Hank, of course, is to not put up with these certain people, and Charlie would just kind of look the other way, or pick up this cigarette himself and throw it in the trash because it's the right thing to do. No, Hank is going on and saying well, hey, you better go and pick up that butt, or I'm gonna put it right back into your butt. So what are we gonna do? So it's funny, I watched this movie such a while ago, and now getting back into this movie, it's still funny. I still enjoy it. And plus also it's really nice to have both uh, Richard Pryor and Chris Rock in this movie, as far as the comedians that are being showcased here. So, teeing it up, what is this about? Where can you see this film? Well, where can you see it? Currently, right now, this movie is technically right now being available on Stars. I don't know for how long, but it's still available on Stars. You could also go on and do some Google searching and some app finding and be able to still find this movie. You can go into a Google search and find these two apps called either Letter C Movies or Fox HD Movies. And then you'll say app by the end of them. For the Fox HD Movie app, you'll go on, you'll find a app where the logo will say Fox HD Movies, but the title will say Play 1080p HD Movies or something like that. And by golly, go ahead and download both of those apps. Letter C Movies, so that's a letter in the word. And you should be able to see basically anything, app exclusive content, brand new releases that are usually premium access right now. You can also go on to a app through a Google Play Store called TV Crush. And if you search the word TV Crush through a Google Play Store, you'll see an app that has a logo that says HD Movies with this like kind of king crown off to the side. And download that app, and you'll be able to see like a cluster of movies. Not quite sure if this is going to be one of them, but like you'll be able to see a huge number of movies for absolutely free. So, teeing it up, what is this movie about? Teeing it up, we have Charlie, who in the very beginning of this movie is to get married, and that marriage all of a sudden is to fall apart, and we find out that Charlie is to also consistently be questioned about his three sons and how his three sons are very unique. They're very intelligent men, very like geniuses, almost like genius level. And toward probably genius level to them is just like, oh well, that's nothing. So Charlie is to go on after his marriage is to fall apart, and Charlie's wife is to unfortunately leave him. Charlie, I guess, is to just bury himself in his job or bury himself in the love of his sons. And it's just kind of like keep on going on. And so all of a sudden, we have Charlie everywhere he is to go, where we, of course, have Charlie asking certain people in the town politely to do certain things, and they immediately just kind of like just walk all over Charlie as if he's not even there. So we then get to the point where we are at a grocery store, and Charlie switches to Hank, and then is to go on and destroy and humiliate and then go on and need to go back to work to then have a therapist or doctor of sorts give him medication to prevent him having this this schizophrenic rage persona. So Charlie, it seems, is taking this medication, and then all of a sudden he meets Irene. And Irene, of course, is to need to go and be arrested for something, but then she has to turn around and make her way all the way to this other state of sorts. I believe it's New York, to deal with some legal obligations. And so Charlie is stuck on this road trip with her, and we find out that this road trip goes on to have both Irene, Charlie, and Hank now having to deal with Irene's people that are after her, because it seemed that Irene is to know far too much about this golf course that she was to work at some point, because it seems that certain people were to end up dead. So yeah, so with that said, we have both Charlie and we have both Irene running for their lives, trying to figure out who exactly they can trust. And it seems that even Irene can't even trust Charlie, who is to really be the one that is to be saving Irene's life here and trying to help her, because Irene doesn't know who she's going to get per second, because really at some points we even have Hank, who is in such desperation to want to be with Irene, that he goes on to eventually even portray Charlie at some point in this film. But with that said, let's go into the tee up. Let's go into the spoilers. We'll go into all the rigmarole of all these details. Hopefully, there's a lot of stuff to just kind of plop down in this film. So I'm hoping that I'll get roughly some of it correct or most of it correct. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of just them kind of like skipping around, and there's a lot to cover, and there's a lot of names. So let's get into those names because it's about that time again to just go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we get to spoil this movie. Normally, I would have had that like better timed out, but this time around, I was like, meh, let's see what happens. So, spoilers. So, we have it that Charlie is to have Layla, and Layla is to be with this picnic at Charlie, and they're both wearing like shirts with their photos on them. It doesn't really, like, it kind of seems like they're very random shirts that have these pictures of them on it, but it's like, meh. So we have Charlie that asks Layla at some point. It's like, well, hey, like, what would happen here if I was going and being on the Rhode Island State Patrol, and they needed me to transfer to some place somewhere, and all we could have was like uh, like whale um, like whale puss or whale plus or whatever, and we have Charlie here that's asking Layla. It's like, well, would you still like be with me? And Layla's like, yeah. So it's like, it seems that um, we can go on here and see that these people are going to be forever. And so Layla and Charlie here are to get married, and they drive off. And so Charlie is to carry Layla to the door, and all of a sudden now Charlie is to go onto this limo driver and is to say, it's like, well, hey, like, can I give you like can I give you a check? And the way he phrases it is like, hey, do you people take checks? And the limo driver is like, what do you mean, you people? And so all of a sudden we get to this whole thing about race, or like this, like I'm gonna try to be sensitive here, but like I have to say it, like the stature of this man, which immediately we find out this limo driver is not to be effed with. Because this guy all of a sudden is to start to really defend himself. He's to bust out these nunchucks and is starting to like deck Charlie, as Charlie's saying like, well, wait a minute, I thought that those were banned. So we have Layla that is desperately trying to mitigate this whole situation, or try to be in the middle of it. And so Layla goes and pulls this limo driver off to the side and is just trying to talk to him. And the limo driver is going on and saying here that it's like, you know what, I can't take this crap anymore. Like, this guy just goes on, and he is to be this limo driver because he's paying for like schooling or something like that. And then Layla is like, oh, like you're going to school? And that all of a sudden is to have her be really intrigued with this man. So all of a sudden, next up, we see that Charlie is in this hospital because his wife Layla is now giving birth to children. And so all of a sudden we have Layla, who is giving birth to one child, who is to, of course, be a character of non-Caucasian skin. So all of a sudden all the guys are like, oh no, and all of a sudden we have Charlie that's just kind of looking at his son, and like he's not saying a word about it. He's not saying anything. And so all of a sudden, Layla is to mention, it's like, well, wait a minute, like I'm still pregnant. And so all of a sudden, we find out that Layla is to now have three sons here. And Charlie, of course, is to go on and is grilling. Uh, and so we have one of his coworkers, Trooper Fennerin, who approaches Charlie and is to mention, like, well, hey, like, isn't it a little odd that like your kids like they're kind of like they like their skin isn't like of a normal, you know. I'm trying to dance around it. I want to try to be like very like nice about it. And Charlie just goes on and says like, well, maybe it's just some like gene that that was to be passed down. So the guy's like, well, yeah, like maybe you're right. Like maybe I'm just gonna go on it. Maybe it's just the beer. So just this guy is trying to be polite, but he's just like, why isn't that this guy hasn't questioned this like at all? So all of a sudden we find out that Layla is to finally have probably had this affair for a long stretch of time now. And so Layla is to finally decide to finally leave Charlie and go with this man and like have Charlie forcibly keep the kids. And really, like for Charlie, I probably would have gone on and really wanted a DNA test, but like really Charlie was very accepting of his kids, and plus also I'm sure Charlie just really wanted to be a dad, so give him that. So now that Layla is to go on and leave, and now Charlie is to just try to mentor his sons and is to go on and show them certain TV shows, and it seems like these kids were really interested in watching like Richard Pryor on HBO Max or Chris Rock doing stand up, and I'm like, yeah, like when I was a kid, like I also wanted to stay up late at night to just kind of watch stand up too. Like to me, that was um, always a real fun thing to do late at night. Kind of watch like Eddie Murphy Raw, where he goes on is like he does like his Bob Marley impression, where he's like swinging the microphone and he's like flinging it over off to his side, doing that like one joke where he's pretending that this microphone is basically his wang and he's like chucking it over his side. So like that's what I used to do when I was a kid. I would love to just want to go on and just watch stand up. Stephen Lynch is really fun as far as a stand up comedian, because he used to do these very odd like songs, but they're really fun and they're really enjoyable. So going in here, we have, of course, Charlie's sons that are to grow much older, and it seems that Charlie doesn't age like really whatsoever here. So it seems that all three of these guys are gearing up for college, and these guys, of course, are like almost having like rocket science like classes, and like it's very absurd. And so like one kid is like trying to like figure out um like this chemistry kind of thing, and he just can't figure it out. And so we have Jamal that comes in and is trying to like tell him, it's like, well, hey, like what is this here, like does this look right? It's like, well, yeah. It's like, well, what is this over here, does that look right? And he's like, well, no. It's like, well, get that out of there. So we have Charlie just kind of gearing up to get ready for work. And so all of a sudden he's telling his kids to like, hey man, like I'm gonna get out of here before I have to bust a cap. And so Charlie goes on and is to make his way to uh, to work, where he of course is to go on and see that there is some kid that is jump roping, and Charlie is to try to like protect this kid from possibly having like somebody run her over, or possibly her being like in danger. So Charlie is to try to convince this kid to get onto the sidewalk, and this girl is telling Charlie, it's like, well, hey, I don't have to listen to you because my dad told me to not to listen to you. And Charlie's like, well, yeah, I get that, but like for your safety. And so this girl starts screaming, and so Charlie's like, okay, like I'm done with this girl. So Charlie then goes on and is to go into this barber shop, and he of course to meet up with a guy who's in this barber shop that's to eventually be this car owner, because there is no IMDb for this. Lenny Clark. Um, I also had seen Lenny Clark stand up, and also I'd seen him in like Rescue Me and stuff like that. Really funny guy. Really enjoyed him. Um, so we have Jim that is talking to who is to be like Lenny here, and Charlie is mentioning that this guy's car is been parked for well over a an hour's worth of time. It's actually 3 days worth of time, and Charlie would just appreciate if this guy would just move his car. And so this car owner is just go on Larry here, or Lenny here, is to go on and say, it's like, well, yeah, like I guess like if you're right, and the law is the law. So Lenny is to go and chuck the keys to Charlie and tell him, it's like, well, yeah, just kind of park it by the grocery store. And so Charlie is just like, okay. So Charlie, of course, is to go on, take this car, park this car, and then is to just go into this grocery store. And like he only has this one thing, and all of a sudden he's like bumping into this girl in this line, and this girl is to just like say to, of course, Charlie here, it's like, well, hey, like, and this is after the time that Charlie has gone to this priest and is mentioning like, well, hey, like I have all this pent up anger in me, and I think at some point it's going to explode. This girl in this grocery line is telling Charlie here, it's like, well, hey, like it doesn't really seem like I have much. Like, Charlie, can I just kind of butt ahead of you? And Charlie's like, yeah, sure. And so all of a sudden, this girl butts in line, but all of a sudden she is to also bring 2 carts full of crap through. And Charlie at this point is just freaking done. Like, he is just so upset at this point, to him getting to him just kind of like his like face is just like trying to like bottle all this in, and it can't anymore. And so all of a sudden we have it where Frank is now, or Frank, we have Charlie, who is now Hank, in some words Frank, but not really. So we have Hank that is to go on and thumb through this girl's items, and is to realize that this girl is to have this thing called Veggie Clean, and or Veggie Clean, and so we go on and we have Charlie here, or Hank here, who is to say, it's like, well, hey guys, it doesn't seem like we have a barcode on this item. And so we have Hank that grabs this microphone, is like, hey, up on aisle 5 we have a Veggie Clean here, or Veggie Clean. Like, this girl puts too much cheese on her taco. Yes. Like, Veggie Clean. Like we need a barcode, or we need a price check or something. And so, like, humiliating this woman for going on and doing this thing to him. So Hank then goes on and is to take the girl, the jump rope girl, and is drowning her in this fountain. And then Hank grabs her and is tell her, it's like, hey, what are you gonna say now? And the girl's like, well, I'm gonna tell my daddy. And he's like, wrong answer, and he drowns her again in the fountain. Hank is to go and take, of course, the character Lenny's car, and is to ram it right into the barbershop, and is to open this door, and is to chuck the keys back at Lenny, and is to leave. So after that, we have the Rhode Island State Police, who, of course, is taking Charlie and I guess kind of putting him over like psychiatric evaluation and all this kind of stuff to then give him medication for his involuntary uh, like schizophrenic uh, rage medication. And so we go on and we have these guys that are like, yeah, like you're a schizo, you're a and this and that. It's like, hey, be more sensitive. Come on. So we have Charlie's boss, who of course is Colonel uh, Partington, who is to mention to Charlie, it's like, well, hey, like when your life, almost like sometimes people could really compare a wife and a life as the same thing. Parkinson is to ask Charlie here, it's like, well, hey, like, when your wife left you, like, why is it that you didn't take time off? And Charlie is like, well, like, hey, just because I'm going through a rough time doesn't mean that I was to go on and shorten the department because of it. And it wasn't like I had the flu or anything. And so, but the guys were like, well, hey, it's like you can take vacation time, you can take personal days. And so, really, they're just kind of like stuck with this guy now, and there's nothing they could really do. So, Irene. Irene, of course, is to get booked into this Rhode Island State Patrol, and it's for something that she didn't exactly do. And so now Irene is going on and trying to call um, Dickie, and Irene is trying to call Dickie to try to get all of this stuff to just kind of go away. And Dickie's like, well, I don't know what's going on with you, but like, hey, if you kind of tell me what's going on, we can work this all out. And Irene is like, I don't think so. There's something shifty going on here. So Irene has to go on with one of these patrolmen to have to deal with all this legal stuff within that state. And so someone is going to have to transport her to that other location. And so they, of course, volunteer Charlie because after he's to go on to this vacation, we have really just Partington, who is telling Charlie, it's like, well, hey, like, how about this? Like, after you go on, you drop this girl off, how about you just go on and just take some vacation time? And Charlie's like, well, you know what? That sounds really great. And yeah, like, Partington's like, yeah, just enjoy this time. Just really just let loose and just get out there. So all of a sudden, we have the Colonel, Partington, who is talking to one of his coworkers and mentioning that it seems that after Charlie's to leave, uh, they're probably also going to let him go. Like after he goes on this vacation and takes time off, they're just going to let him go, simply because of his disorder could probably make him unfit to do his job. So, but he's good enough to go on and do this assignment. So, we how it eventually where Dickie is to go on and talk to Lieutenant Girk here, who is to be this kind of dirty cop who is only thinking about possibly killing Irene here and possibly taking down anybody who is to have come here with Irene. And so we have it, of course, where Irene is with uh, Charlie, and they're on this motorcycle ride, and like this to me just kind of feels so much like Dumb and Dumber, where uh, like we just have like both like Jim and the other guy. I think it's like Larry, and they're on this little small tiny motorcycle, and like this is just so reminiscent of that scene where there's like open road and them like making it here. So in this scene we of course have Jim that is getting pelted with all these bugs, and he accidentally swallows one of them because this guy's had this big helmet, but like there's nothing that's like a shield guard or anything. So Jim is mentioning that he loves the open road, even though he's getting bugs all up in his face. So Jim and Irene make it to this location, and so it seems when Irene is to make it to this place, there are to be these two agents there, and we have an agent Beauchesne who is wanting to take Irene into this kind of custody because it seems that Irene could possibly be a witness to certain acts that were to go on within this golf course, because they are to go on and ask her, Irene, about the person that she had replaced as this head groundskeeper. And Irene had mentioned, like, well, yeah, it seemed like this guy had some kind of heart condition. And Beauchesne is saying, like, well, you know what? Like, this guy, not a heart condition. It seems that he was murdered. And so Beauchesne is kind of thinking that, like, yeah, like, we need to keep this girl, so we can kind of use her as a way to kind of get this family to go on and get the Thurman family. So, or this family that owns this golf course. So we have at one point where it seems the the lieutenant is realizing what's going on, and so he sends some assassins there to kill these agents off. But here's the goofy thing. So we have Agent Beauchesne that seems to be on the good side of things, but then weirdly, once one detective is to be, or one agent is to be killed here and the other one is left alive, we then find out that Beauchesne is actually working with Lieutenant Berg, and like he's dirty also. So it's like, wait a minute. Like, was it like, did they just not have a good enough reveal? Like, this was actually a dirty cop the whole entire time, and he was just kind of like, there is no dialogue or no nothing, just saying like, oh yeah, like I'm on your side kind of thing. So we go on and we have Irene that is to scramble to go to the only person that she thinks that can help her, and of course that's Charlie. So Irene is to luckily find out where Charlie is to be held up at, and so she finds his key somehow and is to make her way into this room where Charlie is to have a hefty amount of hand lotion, it seems, and a bunch of tissues, and a picture of of Irene's photo of her mugshot. And all of a sudden, Irene is to wake Charlie, and now we have to have Charlie that's making up all these excuses to have Charlie just say, like, oh, yeah, I was just going through your file and I was just kind of figuring things out. And, oh, like, hey, um, I'm using this lotion because my lips are very chapped. Like, would you want some? We have Charlie that's just like digging himself into this hole. So we have Charlie that is talking to Irene, and she, of course, is telling him what all had happened. And so we have Charlie that's immediately thinking, it's like, well, like, you know what we should do? We should just try to call some other kind of cops and try and get them to help us out. And Irene is like, well, we don't know how far Dickie's wallet is to reach, so like there could be maybe like no one uh, that would be safe for us to just kind of hide out. So, and like here's where I'm starting to get a little foggy about certain actual details. But anyways, so we go further into this story, and so Charlie, who's really not believing Irene's complete story, decides to go on and is to call the police. And of course, they get a hold of Lieutenant Girk. And now Charlie is to say, it's like, well, yeah, I don't know about Irene, but it seems like she really has this story about not trusting the police. And so Lieutenant's like, yeah, I completely understand, as we have it where the lieutenant is going to kill both of them. And so now Charlie is to shift into Hank and is to try, of course, to take down this lieutenant here. And we consistently have it to where Irene is to kind of give most of these kind of knockout blows. And so they scramble off and they steal this lieutenant's car. And you would immediately have, like, shouldn't there have been an APB out for this guy's car? Because, like, I'm sure the guy would know his own license plate. But so, it seems that it seems that Hank is to drop off to get a certain number of items. And when Charlie is to kind of wake up and is with Irene, they go into this trunk to see what the items are. And Charlie's like, great, because I'm starving. So it seems that the only thing that Hank is to go on and buy seems to be some plastic schwantz of some kind, and is to be this bottle of wine. And but they also realize that there is rope, a shovel, and a thing of lye, which is to basically have somebody kind of spray this lye to just kind of dissolve all kinds of blood or all kinds of body parts and whatever. So it seems that Irene is to have thought that Hank was to have bought all those items to bury this girl. And so Irene is now having this lawn dart in her hands as all of a sudden Charlie is to switch to Hank, and Irene is telling like Hank, it's like, I know about the shovel, I know about the lye, I know about the rope. And Hank is like, are you serious? Like, you must be joking. And Irene's like, no. And Hank is like, well, like, we stole this from off some guy. And so really that guy's plan was to bury us. Like, that's why those things were there. Like, he was gonna kill us and then dump us off to some side of the road somewhere. So Irene is like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So they go on and they take the lieutenant's car and dump it and off some cliff somewhere. And all of a sudden, we realize that Hank is to have forgotten his wallet on the dashboard. And so now we go on and we have uh, like these guys kind of scrambling around without a wallet. And so we consistently have Hank's character who like grabs food from um, from out of people's hands, or is just kind of like steal food from people's plates because it's survival at this point. So so they're going on, I think, to this like park of some sorts, and so we have Hank that is telling Irene that Hank might go on and take full control for a long stretch of time because really Charlie is just origami and he's always going to fold. He's always going to fumble the ball. And Irene is like, well, you know what? That's great and all, but like, can we just get Charlie out here for a huddle? Just so I can talk to him for a little bit. So Hank is like, no can do'sville, baby doll kind of thing. So we have Hank that goes to this place, and Hank decides for Irene to try to knock him out because he'll probably go on and be found somewhere and complain that he was beaten up at this person's park, and they'll give him a couple of grand payout so that way like authorities don't get involved. And so like that's the way they think they can kind of make some quick cash. Irene goes and kicks Jim here right in the face, and he falls over, and all of a sudden he's like falling down this hill. And every single time we have Hank who ends up getting knocked out, all of a sudden Charlie's to be there getting the aftermath of all the pain. So we find out that Charlie is to have injured his nose and is to have this neck brace now. And every single time that Charlie is to breathe, we have this kind of like dog chew toy kind of sound where it's like and it's like every single time you have this like weird like kind of like sound. So we have these characters go on, and I'm sure there's probably a billion things that I've probably forgotten about by now, but it is what it is. So it's a fun movie. It's fun kind of thing going on here. So we have it at some point where they're to go on to this diner, this restaurant, and so I think this is after the point where Charlie is to go on and try to get these cokes, and one guy is heckling him. So Charlie changes into Hank and is to beat this guy into this Coke machine to get his Cokes. And Hank is kind of desperate to figure out how to outsmart Irene here because Irene is really interested in Charlie, because Charlie at one point is to say to Irene the main reason why he's going on and helping Irene is because he likes her. So Hank is to go in and fool Irene and tell her it's like, well, hey, like I figured out how to finally just like like get rid of like those old like those Hank thoughts by just kind of counting to 10 and telling this guy, it's like, well, hey, like, I didn't like what you said there, sir. And the guy's like, well, yeah, like, it's like my bad. And so the guy walks away. And so Irene is to think that Charlie is Charlie, but Charlie is actually Hank here. So now we have it where Hank and Irene are together and they're having one night of bliss. And Charlie's to wake up the next day having to pee like a racehorse. And Charlie asks Irene, it's like, well, hey, like, why is it that I have to pee so badly as if I've been kind of been doing some bedroom business the whole entire night? And Irene's like, oh my God, like, Charlie didn't even know. Like, Charlie wasn't even aware of what was going on. And so now Charlie is completely oblivious that he, of course, was to go on and was to do this act with Irene. And then he whips out uh, this toy and he's showing it, he's flinging it around. He's like, oh, well, like Captain Winky, basically, if you guys remember the movie Pet Detective. So we have Charlie that is to mention that his rear end is just kind of sore here. And so Charlie was to ask, like, Irene, it's like, well, like, was this good for you? Like, was this, like, something that you needed? And Irene is like, no, that was something that you needed for yourself. And so Charlie looks at this thing and chucks it off to the side, this toy of sorts, and is to go on and just be like, oh my God, like, my life is just like one crazy, just nut job of a thing. So to realize how dark Hank really truly is. But there honestly is some times where we can see certain shades of other Jim Carrey things in this movie. Like we had it when Hank was to go on and take Irene's hand and kiss it. We had this kind of French character that I think uh, Jim was to use in the movie The Mask, where Jim was trying to get Cameron Diaz, and he comes to her as the Mask, and he is to be this French guy, and he is like, wine is like a red, red rose, and this and that. And so, trying to be very poetic in all this, but it just kind of feels like, okay, like we've seen this shade of character before, as well as like we've seen Jim here using this Hank voice when he, of course, to go on and be like his imitation of Clint Eastwood. And so, like, a lot about this, like, I think we start to see slowly but surely, especially when we watch like a lot of other Jim Carrey movies, how there's some stuff that kind of gets recycled or reused or whatever. But it's like, well, hey, like, if a person kind of has this in their, like, just in their kind of just back pocket, why not use it? So we have Charlie and we have Irene that make their way to this restaurant. And so all of a sudden we have Charlie who is seeing this kid who is consistently slurping up this drink into an utter absurd degree, to where Charlie turns into Hank and is now want to fight this kid. And all of a sudden the dad is like, hey guy, like leave my son alone. And Hank is like, well, hey sir, like my argument is not with you, it's with this kid, and he just needs to stop. So all of a sudden we have this waiter that comes in, and this kid is to be, of course, very pale, to the point of uh like Hank calling this kid like Q-tip, or uh, or any number of other, like Milky, or any number of other names. So all of a sudden, this kid walks away, and Irene is telling Hank, it's like, well, hey, like, for like how like you were like treated, and how you've gone on to become this person, like, how can you go on and humiliate that guy the way you did? And like, you should apologize to that guy. And so Hank is going to be like, hey, Milky, Whitey, like, come back over here. So Hank finally is to talk to this kid. It's like, well, hey, did any of the stuff that I said, like, did it like offend you? Did it hurt you? And the guy was like, yeah, like the whole shtick did. And he's like, well, I'm truly sorry. So Hank goes on and is to get out of this diner, and is to mention how, like, Charlie, when Charlie was to, of course, be like divorced by Layla, how like Hank took over a lot. And we have Irene who's telling like Hank here, it's like, well, technically, then that is to mean that Layla was to divorce both of you. And we, of course, have it where Hank is to realize that. So, going into this movie, we have, of course, where the guy who is to be the guy that was humiliated about his white skin is to, of course, go on with these guys for the rest of his adventure. And so at one point we have, of course, Charlie that is to ask this guy, it's like, well, hey, what's your real name? And the kid ends up saying that his real name is Casper, but a lot of his friends call him Whitey. And so they just call him Whitey for the rest of this movie. So we go on into this story, and we have it where, of course, Charlie is to go through this, of course, plastic surgery after he is to try to jump onto this train, but that ends up failing. And so Charlie goes through this plastic surgery to correct his nose, and is to now have a chin improvement. That Irene is to say that Charlie was to always have a weak chin, so Hank wanted to go on and improve uh, Charlie's chin. And so Charlie is like, what? Why was he adjusting my chin? Like, I loved my chin. So we now, for the rest of the movie, have this like kind of band-aid thing on there for the rest of the time there. And so it seems that Whitey was to go on and pay for this plastic surgery for Charlie to correct like his face. So, and plus, it also would be really annoying for the rest of this film for us to have that like toy squeaking sound for noise every single time that Jim is to breathe. Sadly enough. So we go further on into this film, and so now, of course, we have these guys going on to this train, and we have it at one point where it seems that Jim is trying to distance himself from Casper, because at one point we have Charlie that's talking to Whitey, and so Whitey is mentioning that he was to kill his whole family. And Charlie's like, oh my god, like, well, I guess we all have like certain family problems, and I guess that was yours. And Whitey's like, well, yeah, like I was supposed to go on and get out of this hospital, but they said like since I turned 21 and like it was about time. And so we have Charlie that's telling Whitey, it's like, well, you know what, I'm gonna just go on and try to make up with what's her face. And Whitey's like, well, good decision. So Charlie goes on is to talk to Irene and tell her what all Whitey just said. And Charlie's like, hey, can I just sleep with you tonight? Like, I promise I won't do anything. I just want to, like, can we just go on and be in the same room together. I just don't trust Whitey. So, but then both of them push on to try to go their separate ways, and so we have Charlie and we have Irene that are on this train together, and so they're going on to this train station, and so like we also had this one hotel moment where the two agents were to, like the lieutenant and the agent were to spot where these guys were, and it seems that there was to be this phone call like diverting them elsewhere, which actually was Charlie's sons that were trying to like help out their dad, and plus also they were going and taking this one guy and supposedly trying to put a chicken's egg in this guy's butt, but instead it seems like they try to put this chicken's head in this guy's butt weirdly, and they end up, I guess, succeeding in that. So and then they commandeer the helicopter, and now they're using this helicopter to go on and just try to find their dad. So the agents are going on to try and scramble to where this location is that they were to have given this false thing. And so this leads our characters to try and scramble out of there and get to this train station. And we, of course, have Dickie, who is to go onto this train and is to try to stop both Charlie and both Irene. So Irene is to scramble and get onto another train, while, of course, Charlie's having to fight his way through a number of different people, either certain other Rhode Island States patrolmen, Dickie, this other lieutenant, so on and so forth. Just a number of people that Charlie is having to fight here, while also at some point we had both Charlie and Hank fighting one another. Finally having this be the last straw, because of course once we had like Charlie having more and more time with Irene, the more like Charlie was getting further and further upset. So it's like, hey man, the gloves are off, pal. So all of a sudden we have both Charlie and we have both Hank here that are upset with one another, and so now they're fighting one another. They're like, we have these moments where it seems that like one person kind of like one hand is like grabbing the other and kind of propping this guy up just so that way they can like Jim can smack himself up against something, or get thrown down this hill or something like that, to just kind of showcase that like Jim is just beating himself up here. Even at the point when Charlie goes and is to take this car, we have Hank that is trying to get rid of Charlie, and so Hank tries and chucks Charlie out of this car, and all of a sudden we have Hank who is to try to run and try to catch this car, and then he gets into it, and then Hank is telling Charlie, it's like, well, hey, like, how did you get back in here? And Charlie is telling Hank, it's like, well, like, you can't ditch me. And so they realize that they're just kind of stuck together. And so they continue to fight one another, but still, like, they're going to go on and eventually at some point work together, as Dickie is to go on and take Irene and is to take her over this bridge to try and kill her, as Dickie is to have this gun. So Charlie is to try to scramble and make it through this bridge, as Irene is consistently calling for Hank. And Hank is telling Charlie, it's like, well, yeah, she's calling for me. And Charlie's like, yeah, whatever. So we go on and we have these two men inside one person make their way to try and save Irene. We also had the one moment where like Charlie was talking with Irene and having these photos, and it seems that Irene doesn't really have much friends anymore because she was to move around so often, and Charlie was to go on and give Irene one of. Take a second. Charlie was to go on and give Irene one of these photos to just say like, well, hey, like I have so many of these photos just kind of laying around. Here you go. So Irene, of course, is to go on and is to be on this bridge and is consistently calling for Hank. And so Charlie is to, of course, decide that he's going to save this girl, and Hank is wanting to give up here because he's like, hey, no, like, we're not going to go. This is too risky. We could die. So let me pause here for 1 second. All right. So we go on here, and we, of course, have Charlie, who's going to take complete control of this body, say that he no longer needs Hank anymore, that Charlie's just going to take control. And so Charlie goes on, makes his way through this bridge, and is to try and go on and take this gun away from Dickie, convincing him he no longer needs this gun. And so Dickie shoots Charlie in the finger, blowing off his thumb. And so we go on and again have them take down Dickie here, but it's not really coming from either Hank or Charlie. It's still, as always per usual, going with Irene. So we have these characters go on, and everything's going on fine. And so now it seems we have the sons that arrive with this helicopter, and so like both of them all like kind of scramble out of there, and so now they know who is really left to trust, and it's really just the Rhode Island State Patrol. So Irene is to now get to go to this, like, her own car to go off on her own journey. She is to have this rental car, and so it seems that Irene is to leave and have Charlie kind of hug it out with her. And Charlie's saying, it's like, well, hey, like maybe I'll see you sometime soon. And she's like, well, yeah, maybe I'll see you sometime soon. So Irene all of a sudden is stopped by this roadblock by these police officers, and they're saying, it's like, well, it looks like it seems that you're gonna be here for a while. And Irene's like, what didn't I do this time? And so all of a sudden they start patting her down, and we have Charlie who kind of like spins her over, and he's telling her, it's like, well, hey, like you're going to be with me for a very long time. And so all of a sudden we have this plane that goes by that says, will you marry me? And both Irene and Charlie are kissing one another, and Charlie takes a breath and then goes back into kissing Irene again. So we go on into there being this happy ending with this family and Irene and everything working it all out. So really there is an end credit scene of this movie where, and some people probably don't know that this movie does have an end credit scene where they're looking for Charlie's thumb, and Whitey is to think that he is to see the thumb, and all of a sudden this fish eats the thumb, and he's like, well, I guess not. And so that's how the end credit scene ends with this film. We also had like this credit scene where they had a number of people who are all like edited out of the film for time constraints. So I guess certain people were to have much more legitimate roles and they didn't, or to really just kind of like showcase all these people that were to have been like having small roles in this movie compared to everybody else. So with that said, I think that this covers most of this movie. So I'm gonna get the heck out of here so I can go on and just rest up and then go on to the other day of videos and whatever. So I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.